Okay, so everything that we've studied up to now revolved around moving aggregate demand. And so we used fiscal policy, also known as Keynesian economics, to use government budget, which means adjusting government spending or taxation to make aggregate demand move up or down. You know, the basic premise being that if the United States economy is in a recession being stuck in a place like this, then aggregate demand could be moved by government back to where it ought to be at this long-run equilibrium. Remember, this intercept here of the long-run aggregate supply curve is what we refer to as long-run equilibrium, or the natural rate of output. The economy naturally wants to be there. If the economy is stuck in an equilibrium here, which I'm going to call equilibrium number 2, a short-run equilibrium, then the fiscal policy of our government can be used to trick it, to cajole it back out there. And the intercept then of the triple intersect, is what we call long-run equilibrium, or natural rate of output, or full employment. Now here's the thing. We engage in then a what if. And so let's say that we are indeed in a recession, like so, but instead of doing anything about it, government decides to do nothing about it. If that were the case, where we're stuck in a recession like this, then what would happen instead of the movement backwards through fiscal policy or monetary policy, but that's for next week? What we'd see instead then is what's called the long-run adjustment. You see, in the short run, aggregate demand is down. And in the short run, government can use fiscal policy to move aggregate demand outward and to the right. However, if government opts to do nothing and then instead use what's called the long run adjustment, this is a form of what is referred to as classical economics. Classical economics is the idea that government is hands-off, laissez-faire, and does very little and allows the natural business cycle to go up or down. Meaning businesses go out of business, people struggle, or in good times people are happy, people aren't struggling, businesses are doing well. And so in the end then, if this is the situation in the economy, we play the what if game. Government decides not to do any fiscal policy. In the modern era, this doesn't happen anymore. As of the Great Depression, this is standard policy for the United States government. But let's pretend for a minute that government chooses to do nothing. If government chooses to do nothing, then the short run then is allowed to become long run. Now remember what we said. Short run aggregate supply is stuck in the short run. It's stuck in the short run because of contracts. The contracts make rent stay where they're at. The contracts make wages stay where they're at. And furthermore, remember, short run aggregate supply is our inputs. That's sell, capital, entrepreneurship, land, and labor. And so if our short run aggregate supply, if businesses wanted to build new factories, that also can't be done in the short run. Building a new factory takes a long time to do. And so if the long run adjustment is happening, that means that short run aggregate supply is no longer stuck. What that means is businesses will renegotiate these contracts. Businesses will build new capitals. Businesses will buy more vehicles for their fleets, etc. And if this happens, if the long run adjustment is allowed, then what's going to happen is the short run aggregate supply will actually shift. This is not a shock. Remember, shocks happen when there's a sudden boom movement of short run aggregate supply because of catastrophe of some kind. This is a supply shock. The long run adjustment happens because businesses decide to renegotiate, because businesses decide to upgrade. And what that means is that the long run aggregate supply intersects the new aggregate demand right there. And what this means is the short run aggregate supply is going to seek out that spot. It's going to naturally shift in that direction through the renegotiation process. And our short run aggregate supply then goes all the way out to there in what is called the long run adjustment, giving us a new permanent long run equilibrium right back to the natural rate of output. This is referred to as the long run adjustment. The long run adjustment is classical economics. It means government does nothing or very little, hands-off government. Whereas fiscal policy with Keynesian economics means that the government is going to work very hard to move the aggregate demand back to long-run equilibrium. This is also a version of actual real economic growth, because by having a new long-run equilibrium, it could be that the whole aggregate supply curve slid with it, but it might not be. And so in the end then, what we see is the long-run adjustment means that the short-run aggregate supply is allowed to shift to find the new long-run equilibrium. This is the long-run adjustment. AP likes this question. They'll say draw a graph. They'll say show it in recession. They'll say apply fiscal policy. They'll say calculate the multiplier. And then they'll say pretend we did nothing. What would happen to your aggregate demand and aggregate supply graph in the long run if we do nothing? This is the answer to that question. This is called the long run adjustment. That means the government has not intervened and allowed the market to naturally shift.